Startup Builder Live Q&A. This is the place for any startup founder to ask the burning questions that are keeping you up at night and learn from our guest founders, startup support experts, and of course, LeapSheep's own startup building experts who have worked with hundreds of founders and their teams around the world. Welcome, I'm your host today, Kirk Drage. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at LeapSheep. At LeapSheep, we're on a mission to flip the 95% failure rate by making expert and personalized startup building guidance accessible, affordable to all founders around the world. For founders that have joined us, welcome. It's great to have you here. If you've got an idea or a business that you're trying to get to market, that's what we do. We really help businesses turn their ideas into business model hypotheses that can work in theory, and then validate that they can actually get to product market fit before helping you scale up and avoid that 95% failure rate. Thank you to all the founders that have sent questions in before the show. And if you're watching live, please drop any questions you've got into the comments in LinkedIn or YouTube, and we'll prioritize those during the show. But today, we're very privileged to have Fairlie from ADLV Law. I'm still getting used to saying that because, of course, you've recently rebranded, and we've been working with you for quite a number of years. ADLV Law provides full business law services providing founders and established business owners on a wide range of legal issues. They like to understand how their clients' business work and be involved in their adventures. They have a wide range of clients they assist, including technology businesses, retail and product-based businesses, and service-based businesses. The firm's goal is to be their client's lawyer for the long term, from early stage startups through the ups and downs of the business lifecycle to the decision to exit the business and beyond. Catherine, it's awesome to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let's jump straight into the questions. I always like to get a little bit of background on the guests that we have on. So can you share a little bit about how did you get into law? How does someone decide that law is the thing that I want to do? Tell us about that.
So I did, as a lot of lawyers did, I did legal studies in high school, and I really enjoyed it. And when I finished school, I remember my first preference was law. And then about 48 hours before the uni results were due to be released, I had a major panic and I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer. It was going to be too hard and too scary. So I did another degree instead, which was a Bachelor of Justice and Society. And I probably had I actually had a bit of a criminology aspect.
Yeah, right.
But one of the topics I did was business studies. And I found that very interesting. My dad's actually an accountant and he owned his own business. So I had some experience in hearing about businesses around the dinner table and that sort of thing.
That's so valuable, isn't it? As a young kid to find out about that.
Yeah. And then I sort of found that the more my interest was really in that sort of business law topic, and I had sort of this idea in my head that to be a lawyer, you'd be working with guys in suits and corporate lawyers who had no ethics or morals. They just wanted to screw over the little guy.
Very stereotypical kind of.
Yeah. And the more I sort of so that's why I studied this Justice and Society degree. But then the more that I learned about it, the more I thought, well, the only way for me to, be involved in this space is to have a law degree. And I don't have to be the person that's sort of stereotyped in my head. And I think that was actually really good because I didn't start my law degree until I was about 20, which meant I wasn't coming at it straight out of high school. I'm not sure how I would have gone if I had to, hit the books that intensely.
That early. Yeah, I think that sort of raises a question for founders, and certainly for me. Like growing up, you do have this sort of stereotypical, skewed view of what the law and what lawyers actually do.
Yes.
And so you become a founder, and you don't really understand the role of lawyers at all.
No.
I think having a mental model to say that, a lawyer is someone to help you, it's a very creative job. They're helping you figure out how do you be successful in your business and manage the risks and so forth. The reality and certainly my understanding when I started down this path is just couldn't be more different.
Yeah, it's very, I think, the lawyers that you see on TV and that you read about in books and that sort of thing, they're all dispute lawyers and criminal lawyers. And if they're not criminal lawyers, they're, the other side of Erin Brockovich, who are just trying to take down the little guy. So there is
It's all the high drama stuff, right? That's
yeah, all the high drama stuff, which wasn't what I was really interested in. And I was, I really wanted to work with people and speak to people. So it wasn't really until I had a bit more experience around what does business law mean, and what does being a lawyer mean, that I really understood I definitely want to be a lawyer.
Yeah. And to put you on the spot, what do you think being a good lawyer means in the business, like, given that we're talking about sort of business law, corporate law?
Yeah.
What do you think a good corporate lawyer, what defines a good corporate lawyer?
I think there's a few things that are always important. The first is you want them to have a good understanding of the law, but you probably need to understand that when you pick up the phone, the lawyer you speak to might not know the answer to your question, but you want to be comfortable that they can get the answer to your question. And you can study for 6 or 7 years at uni to become a lawyer, but it doesn't mean you know everything. Like how a doctor
in every situation.
Yeah, a doctor can't look at you and read your symptoms and say this is what you have. They have to do tests, investigate it a bit further, and then come up with a plan. And being a lawyer is quite similar. So I think you want someone that you are comfortable will do the work to find the answers to the questions you have.
Yeah.
But you also want someone you like. That I think that's really important. Someone you can get along with, and that you can pick up the phone and not think, oh, I have to speak to the lawyer today. I don't want to do that. Someone you can have a conversation with. And
shouldn't be like going to the dentist, should it?
No,
sorry to all the dentists that are out there.
No. And someone that you have, a relationship with, where that if you pick up the phone and ask them a question, they're not going to judge you. They're not going to say that's a stupid question. They're going to, make a plan to come up with the answer of the question that you have and support you through that process.
Yeah, awesome. Let's talk about founders now. At what time should founders first start talking to a lawyer?
Look, a lot of the questions I think I'm going to be asked, the answer would be it depends. But
that's the stereotypical lawyer answer, isn't it?
It is. But when you're thinking about talking to a lawyer, there's no point in talking to a lawyer if you haven't got a product and you don't know if people want to buy your product. So you do have to do a little bit of investigating first, but at the same time, you don't want to just talk to a lawyer when something's gone wrong. So probably the key things you're looking out for are, do we need to make sure that we're going to get paid? Is there something in the way that might stop us investigating our idea further and taking it further? So, for example, if you're working in a tech role and you're developing a tech product, you want to make sure that your employment contract doesn't mean that whatever you're developing actually belongs to your employer.
Yeah.
Probably the third most important thing is that if you are going into business with other people, do you need to manage some of those relationships before you start making money? Are you about to start putting money in? And you need to have some sort of framework around where that money goes, and who gets what once you start turning a profit. So, you don't want to spend a large amount of your resources on law or legal aspects too early on, but at the same time, you don't want to, get too far down the track and realize, oh, there's actually a couple of documents we would have preferred to have in place before now. A good lawyer will say to you, rather than me preparing a document right now, why don't we have a chat for an hour and a half, work out what the plan looks like, and we can make a list of priorities of documents you'll probably need, how much each will cost, and you can decide when you start thinking about them.
Yeah. I think that's great advice is just start spending some time with your lawyer early. One to build the relationship. I think, as you said, you want a relationship with your lawyer. You don't want it just doesn't want to be a transactional thing when you've got a problem. Yeah. You want them to actually help you not only with the problems that you know, but your unknown unknowns. So that you want them to be able to suggest things to you, and you need a certain level of relationship to be able to have that kind of advice and guidance. So what would you normally say if I was say I was still in a corporate job and I was going, I think I'm going to start a startup, and maybe I need to select a lawyer. Can I reach out to you and say, hey, I'm thinking about maybe finding a lawyer, and I want to just meet some lawyers to see who I kind of gel with. How do you deal with that sort of situation?
Look, it always depends on the firm that you're going to talk to. So for example, our firm, if you call one of the lawyers in our firm, we say, look, we're not going to charge you for a 15-minute conversation to work out if you like us or not. And I think that's probably a good sign for most lawyers that you're engaging with, that you want to work out what sort of questions do you have, and what can you get in a relatively short time frame that you're not paying for. That's not to say that you should be expecting someone's going to meet with you for an hour and try and sell themselves to you for free, but you can if you can talk to someone for 15 minutes and you're comfortable with the sort of things they're talking to you about, you should have a good indication of whether you like them, whether you think you can have an ongoing relationship with them. We do get a lot of people saying, how about we go out for a coffee and we work out if we can work together. It is, at the same time, lawyers are running businesses, so that's not always possible.
Economically viable to meet every day for coffee.
And you can change lawyers if you need to. So it's not, while it is important to have someone on the other end of the phone that you like, you don't have to stick with the same person forever.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I mean, if you've got a firm like you guys that will take a 15-minute call, I think take advantage of that for sure. But I know when we started, we were quite happy to pay for an hour just to be able to spend an hour just to start to ask, because you don't know what you don't know, and you're a pretty unsophisticated customer usually when you start down this journey. And so just being able to have a bit of an open conversation, say, look, I know that it's going to cost me some money, but just the ability to spend some time having that open-ended discussion without any particular outcome in mind. We found that super valuable anyway when we started.
I think, and that's sort of what I was saying about, when do you need to start talking to a lawyer? If you're speaking to a few people, you can get a bit of an idea of what do different people or different lawyers think are the priorities you should be focusing on as you're just getting started. Do they all have a consistent view? Or, has one lawyer you've spoken to said, look, I think you don't need these 4 things, but you need these 2 things first. And this is sort of our plan about how we would implement those things. Or have you spoken to someone else on the other end of the spectrum who said, look, I need you to put $50,000 in our trust account and we'll get to work. We'll send you a bill at the end. You sort of want to have a good idea of how a lawyer is going to charge you. And you really just want to get along with them.
No, that's great advice. Hey, I can see you. We've got Kelly online on LinkedIn. Hey, Kelly, great to have you with us. You are bringing up the issue of shareholder agreement. So that's there are many types of documents that you need when you're starting a company, and a shareholder agreement is one of those. Can you perhaps talk about what are some of the key documents that you might want to think about just to start to educate the uneducated?
So the shareholders agreement is a really good one. So if you're going into business with others, you want to think about how are you managing that relationship with them? What are you expecting of other people? So in terms of what cash are they going to put in, what skills are they going to put in, how many hours are they going to put into the business? Are they going to continue to work in their day jobs, or are they quitting and going straight into the business? Shareholders agreements should also have some sort of governance around how does the company sort of operate when everything's going smoothly. So having regular meetings, who makes what sort of decisions, and do you need a 2/3 majority to make certain decisions? Do you need unanimous support to make certain decisions? As well as how do I get out, which is really important, because coming from the outset, you might be thinking, I'm in this for the long run. I'm never going to leave the business until the day I retire or the day I die. But stuff happens in the meantime. And so it's really important, if you are going into business with other people, that you're on the same page quite early about what does that look like in the long run. Other documents you need includes documents around how you're going to get paid, what sort of services or products do you offer, and having some legal protections around that as well. And if you're developing products that have intellectual property, you want to make sure that that intellectual property remains with the business, not with individuals.
Individuals, yeah. And as you said, if you're employing people that might not be full-time, if they've got other employment arrangements, make sure that other employment arrangements are not infringing on your relationship with them. Yeah, there's a lot to think about, isn't there, in this space, which is why early is better. And that's what Kelly's saying here, saying definitely early on. That's great.
Yeah, definitely early on. Yeah.
And the other thing that I think really comes through in what you're saying, which is our experience with thousands of founders, is nothing ever goes as you kind of plan in business, right? So you need to be constantly readjusting your expectations and your plan as things go forward. So a simple example, as you mentioned there, is you might come up with an agreement with a co-founder because you and they have decided that you're going to work so many hours per week, but then something happens, your job situation changes, or your financial or your family situation changes, and suddenly you're not working the number of hours that you thought you would. And so if you've got this sort of fixed agreement in place, that sort of unfairness starts to creep in. And so you've got to have mechanisms in place to deal with that kind of change, don't you?
And have some flexibility in there, because circumstances do change. And, life happens to everyone. It's an unrealistic expectation that if you go into business with 3 people, in 30 years' time, those 3 people will still be there and you haven't had any issues. People need to take personal leave. They might go through separation or divorce, and that can have a big impact on a business. Even if you're not a spouse in that relationship, it can have a big impact. So trying to, particularly when you're going into business with others, there are a few more considerations that you don't necessarily have to think about if you're just a startup on your own.
Yeah, 100%. And so, I find speaking to other founders is a really good way to understand what's their experience and how they navigated things.
And coaching as well, in terms of, I know LeapSheep offer coaching services, but someone who has been through the experience before has a group of people that are all in the same stages of business as you are, and are experiencing different things, because, like we discussed earlier, there is a lot of unknowns, and the only way to learn about those unknowns is speaking with people that have had different experiences to you, and working out, what worked for them, what didn't work for them.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, great advice. Excellent. Let's get to the sticky question of budget. How should founders even think about budgeting? Because it sounds like, based on the discussion so far, that the "it depends" answer is a big thing. So can you even budget for legal services? How do you advise people to think about that?
Usually what I would suggest is having that first meeting with a lawyer and coming up with a roadmap together of what are the sort of legal issues you need to consider, and then you can prioritize what is most important to you or for the business at the life cycle you're at the moment, and based on how much money you have to spend. Look, if, like I said earlier, there's no point spending money on legal services if you haven't found out that people actually want to buy what you're selling. But
Yeah.
You should be checking in with a lawyer every now and again as you're getting started to make sure you do have arrangements in place for, particularly the things that happen in the first maybe 2 to 3 years. So yeah, budget's a really tricky question to answer, but it is all about managing what resources you do have so that you're not over-investing in one aspect. So it's no good spending $50,000 with a lawyer if you can't market your product and you need help with that, but there's no cash left over for it. But likewise, I've spoken to people in the past that have developed a product and they've had that, short meeting with us, or even longer meeting, where we've come up with a bit of a plan about the things we think they need to consider. And they've said, oh, actually, we just want to hire someone to do all our videography for marketing. We want really like bespoke high-end ads, and we'll come for the legal help later. It's probably the budget depends on what is the product, how riskier is the product that you're delivering, are you going into business with others, but where else do you need to spend a bit of money so that you can appropriately scale the product up to get it to market.
Yeah, it's something that we talk about all the time with founders is over-investing in some areas and under-investing in other areas. And so you end up with a sort of lopsided, unbalanced startup. And so we always talk about this journey of building a company, building a new, kind of startup. Use this framework we call the disruptive innovation journey. I know that we've taken your law firm on some of this journey. And we introduce this when we start working with new founders, and the different stages, and particularly this pre-revenue, pre-product stage. There's a lot of risk you can take out of the business just by having conversations with the market to, as you say, really validate that the market has the problem that you think they've got. They value that in the way that you think they value it, and we're willing to pay to have that problem solved. That's even before you start talking about your solution to that problem. So there's a lot that you can get done at this stage. And I think, one of the best pieces of advice that you gave there is spend some time with your lawyer, like choose a lawyer, spend some time with your lawyer, build that roadmap, because that's what you do for every other part of your startup, hopefully, is you're like thinking about building a product roadmap, and you should be thinking about building a marketing and sales roadmap for, which channels you're going to go into, and, what kind of buying experience you're going to offer to your customers. And the legal roadmap kind of makes sense. And as you say, if you continue to reassess where you're at, because sometimes, and that's what these back arrows are for, sometimes you have to do several do-overs. And so it takes you longer to get through than you think, or sometimes you meet a customer that is really excited by what you're doing and wants to go faster. So sometimes you have to pull things forward. So having that roadmap, I think, is fabulous advice. But also using the typical agile kind of approach to reassess constantly about what your needs are based on your experience with the market.
Absolutely.
Really, really good advice. Let's talk about co-founders, and you touched on a little bit about working with other people and sort of sharing some business ownership with other people. But having worked with lots of business owners and business partners, what's your advice for people that are thinking about taking on a co-founder and getting into that kind of relationship, and how to choose the right one? And what can you tell us?
I think it's really important to know what are your different strengths and weaknesses. How do your particular set of skills complement each other? So we often tell our clients that it's all well and good going into business with someone else and saying, yeah, we're equal partners, we're going to do everything together, make decisions together. in the long run, our experience is that doesn't work. There needs to be a boss in the business, someone who's got a little bit more say in some of the decisions that are being made, so that and that person often has more skin in the game, whether it's they've put in more cash into the business or more skill set into the business, or they have a greater knowledge base than the other person. You don't tend to go into business with someone who has the exact same skill set as you, because you'll have different ideas of where things should go based on the product development side of things, but you'll also have the same weaknesses in terms of neither of you might be good at dotting the I's and crossing the T's. So I think that's quite important, to have a good understanding of what do you each bring in, and do those skills complement each other, or is going to be cause for tension later on. And it's really important to have some discussions around what your expectations are of different people coming into the business. Is it that you expect people to quit their day jobs within 3 months and work full-time in the business? Is it that you expect them to put cash into the business every time it's needed? Those sorts of things is where tensions always arise, when there's a difference between expectation and reality. And so trying to have some really productive conversations around what are your expectations of each other, what commitment are you making to each other. And it might be that the first time you have these discussions, you put together a document between the two of you that is not a legal document. It's just sort of a set of rules that you have between each other that is flexible, a little bit flexible, but quite informal. But you've committed to each other, this is what we're planning to do. So that before you do that early stage investment, which is more time investment in terms of having conversations with people about, are they interested in the product? You have an idea of what are you each bringing to this, and is this going to work in the long run?
Yeah, I think it's such good advice, and it sort of translates to many areas where you need legal support. Like if you're trying to do a partnership agreement with a business partner, just starting with a list and sort of agreeing before you get the lawyers involved necessarily to start to draw up legal documents. And a lot of people, and probably I fell into this category, is thinking that you start with a legal document, but often that's not the right place to start, is it? I mean, it's good to have awareness of the structure of the legal document that are generally good practice to what the issues are that you need to cover, but it's not necessarily the right starting place. Just a whiteboard or a piece of paper where you can just agree, because a lot of law is about just agreeing on relationships and what people want out of relationships.
Absolutely. So if someone comes to us and they say, we want you to draft a shareholders agreement or a partnership agreement or a constitution for our company, we can do that. But the document is only as tailored as you can make it. And we can give suggestions about this is what people usually do, or this is how good governance in the business might work, but it doesn't substitute what do you want to do between the two of you. Because if you have a dispute about the shareholders agreement that we've drafted, that you've just said, look, draft something for us, we just want something in place and we'll always amend it later, and there's a dispute in some period of time later where those expectations that you had at the start hasn't matched the reality, that shareholders agreement isn't going to help you because it's not tailored to your circumstances. So it's the early conversations about what are you each hoping to get out of each other, and how are you expecting things to run, and holding the people that you're working with accountable to what they said they were going to do.
Yeah, 100%. That question of going to a lawyer and saying, can you draft me a shareholders agreement? To me, that just sounds like a really bad ChatGPT prompt.
Look, it probably is, and to be honest, it's really, when someone says to us, we just need you to draft us a shareholders agreement, it's actually really tricky for us to do that. And it's not, personally, it's not how I like to work. I can, I would usually say, look, we can definitely help you draft a shareholders agreement. How about we have a chat first about what you want the shareholders agreement for? Why do you think you need a shareholders agreement? And
you need to know what quality. You need to know what quality is. It's a bit like going to an artist and saying, "Draw me a picture."
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, well, what kind of picture do you need?
Yeah.
So, and a lot of the issues in the shareholders agreement, although there are buckets of issues that are sort of standardized, as you're sort of alluding to, what you want and what someone else wants in that particular bucket is going to be very different. And so it's really important to have those conversations.
Yes, absolutely. The shareholders agreement is only as good as how much you have personally put into it, and the discussions you've had. We say to people that the ideal shareholders agreement is one that does everything it needs to do, but it's in the bottom of the drawer and you never have to look at it again because you've had those discussions about what are your expectations, what is the reality, and the time that you're bringing it out of the bottom drawer to look at it is something that is, so-and-so has, had some sort of medical condition. They need to buy out from the business. What did we say? How did we say we were going to value the business when we needed someone to exit? So it's more those sort of conversations that you want to sort of cater for, rather than, someone hasn't done what they said they were going to do. We now need to go to a dispute resolution process in the Constitution or the shareholders agreement.
Yeah, good one. And how do I become a better client for a lawyer? How do I become more informed? What's the best way for me as a customer of a lawyer to get informed, to ask you better quality questions, do you think?
I think speaking to other founders, other startups, other business people is really, really valuable. And you should do it with a group of people that you trust, and that are trying to get the same things out of those conversations that you are. So don't just join an organization that's a networking organization for the sake of joining it. Look for organizations that are offering networking opportunities or coaching services that align with what you're doing, that are industry specific or founder specific, so you can get an idea of what other people are experiencing. Read as much as you can about what other founders have gone through. Everyone's releasing a book about their foundership journey, so you can read a lot about what different people go through. But also just speak to your lawyer, speak with your accountant, speak with, most people who you're dealing with in your business have some sort of business experience themselves, whether they work in a business or they have founded their own business offering services that you need. So if you speak with all the people that are in your network, you'll have a better idea of the things you need to think about.
Yeah, it's great advice. Conversations are everything. Even if you're not part of a network, I find just getting onto LinkedIn, reaching out to founders and saying, "Hey, I'm a new founder on my journey, and I've been, looking at your journey online and the way that you're posting about it. Would you have a cup of coffee and share some advice with me?" I think most founders are willing to give up their time for people that are earlier on their journey, and that doesn't require you to spend any of your money, join any kind of group or anything. If you've just got that initiative and start building those relationships, I think it's one of the best ways you can get started.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and obviously using people. We haven't talked much about jurisdiction because obviously law is very specific to the geography that you're in. So finding people that are local to you in the markets that you're going to work in is obviously pretty key too, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. So just building on the co-founder question, what about the equity split question? This is always a challenging one. Do you have any advice for how co-founders should think about equity splits?
So equity is always, like you said, it's always tricky to work out who gets what. But it's a real, you really have to think about what is each person contributing to your business, and how do you recognize that? So have you brought someone in because you don't want to pay a salary to an employee. You need them to have equity to earn their keep rather than a wage. Then that will help give some weight to what the equity split looks like. But it's no good you being the brains behind the operation in terms of you have the technical knowledge to deliver the product or service, but your equity is less than 2%, or it's a very minimal amount. Yeah, you don't want it to be skewed too far in that direction. And why does someone think they deserve equity? Everyone should be saying, these are the reasons why I deserve the equity I should get. Like, I'm giving up my day job and I'm going to work full-time in this business, so I need more equity because I'm giving more up at the outset. But then you have to evaluate that, as the business progresses. So in 6 months' time, are people doing what they said they were going to do, or have they completely changed what their attitude is and they've decided, oh no, I'm not going to quit my day job, I still want that, and I'm also going to take a 6-month holiday every year because I've just won the lottery and I've got money to spend, and I don't want to work. So I think having some discussions around what people's expectations are, what are they bringing into the business, and who's really the driving force. If the business doesn't exist without you, then you should have equity, and you should have a significant share of that pie. But at the same time, should my lawyer have equity in my business, or should I just pay them for their services? Having honest discussions about what is it that you actually bring into the business, why do you deserve the equity, and having some flexibility that gets reassessed in 6 months' time. Are we still doing what we said we were going to do? Does this equity split still make sense? And then you're probably looking at it again, a year after that, and then 18 months after that, and then 3 years after that, so that you're continually reevaluating, does the split that we've agreed on make sense? Are we happy working together? And big businesses all have planning days and those sorts of things, and those regular discussions about what's going on in the business. Any business should sort of try and run like that as well, where you say, okay, well, this day at this time, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think the other mental model that I find really valuable is, when you're starting a company, you're essentially playing the role of the board as well as the executive team. And so thinking about your role as the board, saying, well, who would I employ to run this company, and what's the right kind of compensation for the people that are doing the work, and then you can kind of get a more objective view from the company's point of view of what kind of makes sense. Because I think it's really hard when you're trying to advocate for your own position. There's an inherent conflict of interest there, isn't there? That's hard to sort of get around, and it's also very emotional. You're deeply passionately engaged in your business, and you want to get compensated for your effort and your skills. I think a couple of the mistakes that some of the advice that you've given there will help avoid are things like overvaluing people in the business. I think is something that's often done. I think we were talking before we joined that, if you're a heart surgeon and you're used to being paid, a huge amount of money, and you decide to start a startup, and you're out there, having conversations with customers, doing some, early marketing and that kind of work, then you need to be valued as a marketer, not as a heart surgeon, because that's the work that you're performing. That's what you're employed to do. So I think getting that straight, which then means that you might need to say, well, I can actually earn a lot more money just being a heart surgeon, being an investor in this business, than being an operational resource for this business. Or I'm sick of being a heart surgeon. I'm doing this because I enjoy it, and then I have to be willing to give up the salary expectations because I'm no longer doing the thing that earns me that salary. So having those kind of conversations, I think we often find are things that people sort of just suddenly find themselves in the middle of this situation, haven't really thought about all of these kind of rules. And that goes back to, talk to other founders, the advice you give there about have some sort of regular day where you talk about this stuff. I mean, I think for early stage startups, quarterly is a really good
Absolutely
cadence for that, because things change a lot in the very early stage. And something you haven't talked about is sort of the concept of vesting or making things flexible so that you don't go, well, yeah, it's going to be 70-30. We've agreed on that. We've had this conversation. But then, of course, as you say, if someone gets sick or some circumstances change, how do you then adjust that 70-30 based on the reality? What's the sort of mechanisms that you'd normally put in place to make those adjustments?
Yeah. So that's all really important, and your shareholders agreement can have those mechanisms in there to say if these certain things happen, there's buyout rights or there's discussions that need to be had around equity. Where tensions arise in businesses is where I said that expectation doesn't meet reality, but it's where you don't have a forum to chat about it, because the legal side of things, even though I'm a lawyer, I know that's really boring to most people. And so, those conversations are really easy to put off, especially when you're doing something really exciting about getting this product to market and you can feel like, it's this close and you're just about to take the leap and it's going to be fantastic. And, we often say to our clients that if you have these underlying tensions, most people aren't that confrontational and they're not going to bring it up out of the blue. So having a planned time to talk about the business and have really honest conversations. And, it also comes back to the conversations that you might be having with other founders and how they were able to bring up issues with their co-founders and, in a constructive way, where you're not just, calling them out of the blue at 4:00 in the afternoon and saying, hey, I think we need to talk about our equity because it's just not working anymore. You're setting your expectations of these are the things we're going to discuss, and we discuss these on X date each quarter. I think it just helps, settle some of those tensions or some of the uncertainty that will be sitting in your mind. That no, there's a particular day that we talk about these things. Obviously, if there's an urgency, you'd make an arrangement to have an earlier meeting. But, we've put expectations in everyone's mind that these are the important things to discuss on that day and run an effective meeting about, where are we at legally? Where are we at from all kinds of risk perspectives? Are we happy to continue down this journey, or do we need to revisit some of what we agreed on at the start?
Yeah, I think that's super good advice. As a founder, you're always got less time than you want, and you're often driven by, customer demands. If a customer says, "Can you deliver this feature?" It's all hands to the pump to get that feature out. By putting a date in the diary and saying that we really need to talk about our legal structure on a regular basis, it can provide that same kind of accountability where it's an immovable date. You've got to almost treat it as an immovable date.
Yeah, and
which I think
you do have to hold it in that sort of high regard of we have made a commitment to each other that on this day we do this, and set the expectation. That's one of the discussions you would have really early on, that when we agree that we're going to set aside a certain date and time to talk about something, we are both committed to doing that.
We actually do it.
And because, as soon as someone starts being a no-show at those sort of important things, you start thinking, what are they really committed to what we've got going here, or are they, on their own journey, and it doesn't really work for us to stay together anymore in the business.
Yeah, 100%. But even if you miss a couple of those dates and you reflect on it and go, actually, we've missed the last two, we need to be more committed. Because as a founder, you're always trying to figure out how to use your time, how to hold yourself accountable to all the things that you got to do. So yeah, I think that's great.
You'd have some flexibility in that, and if something really important came up, you're not going to say, "Oh no, we can't. We're not going to talk to this investor today who's only got this one day free because we said we were going to talk about the legal stuff that day." But it's about making the commitment to say, "No, we're not available on that day, so we're going to move it to this other date, and we're going to be prepared." Because part of that commitment is being prepared to have those discussions, not just walking in and saying, "All right, so what are we talking about today?"
Yeah, 100%. That's great advice. And do you have any wisdom to share on vesting for founders? I mean, I know some investors want founders to vest their equity. Do you have any opinion on how that plays out in reality? Is that good advice to have founders vest their equity?
I'm coming back to it depends again, but it depends what you want out of your business. So if you're in there for, a short-term gain where you're developing a product and you're going to sell it, then that's probably something you're going to consider. But if you're thinking, no, my passion is developing the product and then continually developing new products or the same product and making it bigger and better, then that's not necessarily something you want to consider. So it's really about and there's a wide spectrum of goals about what people have, and some people will say, "Oh, I just want to give it a go and see where it goes." In that case, you probably don't want to agree to anything where you vest your equity, because you want to keep that flexibility. So it really depends. It does depend on what is it that you want out of the business, and be really selfish about that. If an investor is coming to you and saying, "I want a slice of that pie, I want to speak to you about your product, I'm interested in investing," that means they see value in what you've got. And if they see value in what you've got, you should definitely see value in what you've got and what you can provide to them. And so you shouldn't undersell yourself.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Goes back to that advice. It depends. Like, have a conversation with your lawyer for your particular situation. Let's see if we can do a few rapid fire questions that have come in. So Chloe sent in a question asking, what are some of the most common types of legal mistakes that startups make and how to avoid them?
So the most common mistakes are probably around what sort of legal advice you get and when do you take it. So some people, they won't see us at all until there's a problem, and it's a really big problem, and it's in court and you have to resolve a dispute. So that's probably a major mistake, thinking I don't need legal advice until something bad goes wrong, something bad happens. But at the same time, you've got you have to be comfortable with some level of risk. So one of the biggest risks you have in a business is saying, I'm not going to take any risk at all, because you need to take a risk to achieve something. So you really need to consider what level of risks are you comfortable with, and having that, hour and a half meeting with lawyers early on, and potentially it's regular meetings, just check-ins to see where things are up to say, what are the things I should be considering now? These are the major things that are happening in the business. What risks should I be aware of? Am I spending too much time thinking about this particular risk when I should be focusing on something else? The main things you want to be comfortable with as you're quite early in your journey is how can I get paid? And that's paid by customers, paid from the business. Because if you're not making money, your business isn't going to be successful for very long.
It's a hobby, yeah.
And how am I managing the relationships in the business? So have I got the right documents in place to have employment agreements with my employees, or have I got a shareholders agreement or other relationship governing documents? The other biggest mistake is intellectual property. So at every step of the way, your intellectual property should be sitting in the business and not with any one individual. So, you don't want to get too far down the track and realize the employer at your day job actually owns your entire business by accident. So that's why those early conversations are really important, to make sure that before you're developing anything that has value, you've just had a conversation with someone who's seen it from a number of other perspectives before, to get some good advice about what you need to consider.
Yeah, great comprehensive answer. I think that IP assignment one is probably the most common one that we see. But yeah, fabulous advice. Let's keep moving. Angel investors. I'm starting to talk to an angel investor and want to make sure that I'm not missing anything legally. What should I have in place before I start pitching?
That comes back to the conversation we had a little earlier about what is it that you want out of your business. Are you in it for the short term, long term, medium term? You don't know. Like I said, that if someone is wanting to invest,
and what type of investor you're
what
pitching
is the
to?
investor going to bring into the business, and what value do you place on what they're bringing in? Are they just giving you cash and they're going to be a silent investor anyway? Are they giving you cash but they have an expectation that they have more say over the business than you do? So the sorts of things you need to consider is, what say do you want in the business when someone else comes to invest? Are you still driving this ship, or are you happy for someone else to make some of the big decisions? Are you, what are they giving to you for their investment? Are they just buying equity, or are they going to give you some advice? Are they going to give you some resources that will make your life easier? And what's your plan for the business? Are you sticking around? Are you thinking about buying out? When you start talking to investors, a lot of the time, the way they're looking at it is as though they're buying your business. So you're almost thinking about it as a seller of a business, which is probably a strange way to think about it if you're planning to stay in.
It's a great way
But
to
it is how you need to think about it. You're selling your business and you want to get the most value out of your investor for the lowest cost to you. So, do you have documents in place to govern those relationships? Do you have terms of trade in place to govern how you get paid? And look, often what we do with founders early on is we give them a due diligence checklist that we might give to someone selling their business, and say to them, look, these are the things that if someone's looking to invest in your business, or if someone's looking to buy your business, these are the sorts of things that you need to consider, and start thinking about those from the outset. So you have things in place from the outset, rather than having to get it all together, years down the track when you can't remember why you did what.
Yeah, great advice. I think about it as if you're selling your business. That helps you put some guidelines in place on what you're willing to accept and what you're not willing to accept.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that sort of
everything should be on your
really
terms
good.
as much as possible.
Yeah, great advice. Let's talk about working with people overseas. It's very, I think, appropriate these days to think about utilizing overseas talent. There's there's talent pool out there that's very cost effective. And what are some of the pitfalls in working with that? And Nish has asked here specifically, we're working with freelance developers overseas to build our MVP or our product. What kind of contractual protection should we be putting in place to avoid issues later on?
That is a great question, because often it is, more cost effective to get some overseas assistance, or the skill set that you need isn't available at a cost that you can afford locally. The tricky thing when you start working with people overseas, though, is that the jurisdiction changes. So it's very hard to control someone and something that's not happening near you. So you would want to have some contracts in place around if they're going to be employed, you would need an employment contract, but it's probably a bit more appropriate that you'd have a contractor agreement, which is more around a specific project that someone is working on rather than long-term employment.
Yeah.
And that document would need to deal with intellectual property. So anything that they're doing that relates to your business should be owned by your business, so that assignment of IP should continually flow so that the business owns the product and the intellectual property behind it. And there should be some clauses, strong clauses in there around confidentiality. But it is one of those things that you cannot control what happens overseas. And there is a risk there that, an overseas developer could take your idea and run with it. And it would be very tricky to enforce.
Or just not economically viable, even if it was possible.
So depending on what that developer is doing, you might need to consider whether you engage lawyers in that jurisdiction to help you with those contracts as well. And it'll always depend on what it is they're doing, what is the cost of doing it yourself if it doesn't go well, what is the cost if they take it and run. But you probably also need to consider what level of knowledge does that person overseas have about your entire business? Do they know the name of your business, what they're developing, or do they just have a very narrow brief of what they're doing?
Yeah. All great advice, and I think a lot of what we've talked about today, there's a big portion of values and relationships that are based on commonly shared values that can really help you out of a lot of these situations if you get that right. If you're very mercenary with the way that you select people, you're likely to have more trouble. That's been our experience.
Yeah, and like you do want to make sure that that whoever you're engaging with overseas, there's a reason you're doing it, which is more than just it's cheaper. Like, is it cheaper and they can do a good job or a better job than what you can get locally? Is it, what is it that they're offering that has made you say, yes, I'll take it overseas, and that's worth it?
Yeah, 100%. Look, last question I really want to get to, but we're short on time. So a quick answer to this one. There are so many DIY legal platforms and boilerplate standard documents out there. So companies like Legally and Lawpath, etc. Are they actually good enough for early stage founders, or do they create more risk?
Look,
Tom?
I'm a lawyer in Australia, so I would say not good enough as a very brief answer. But the reason I say that is because they're not tailored to you. No one has given you any advice about why you need that document or what that document is doing for you. Often those contracts have jurisdiction clauses in there that say you can only bring a claim in a certain jurisdiction, and it might be California. If you can't, easily digest the document, it's probably not good, because if you don't understand it, you shouldn't sign it. But those templates aren't tailored to you and your business, and if they might not do what you think they do.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest point that comes through this whole conversation is there's just so much personalization that's required so that you get your outcomes for your business, because every business is different. And even though, particularly in the startup space, we think about, if you're just building a B2B SaaS company, aren't you like all the other B2B SaaS companies? And surely that can be templatized. Yes. But the answer is no, because what one founder wants out of their business and the journey they want to go on is different to another founder, and the type of investor they get is different, and the type of team they has is different. So that's what I hear you saying is speak to somebody that can tailor it for you.
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say we prepare every single document that comes through our firm from scratch. That's just not true. Everyone knows that lawyers have templates, they have precedent documents that they're looking at. But what you're paying for with a lawyer is someone who they might have seen 6 startups who are doing similar things to you, and they say, well, have you thought about this? Or we had an issue with one of our clients where this happened. How about we put this into your document so that you have some protection against that? And coming back to those questions of, well, why have you decided that you need that document? And is that actually the right document for you? Or do you need something a little bit different?
Yeah, 100%. And I think the last thing I'd say that we were talking about earlier is having a partnership with your lawyer, where that lawyer creates those legal documents for you that they probably used with many of their other clients, and they have experience in defending that particular interpretation of the law that they've been using. I think that's really, really, really valuable to think about. And if you just got a template and then you give that to a lawyer, it's, probably if you're a software developer, you can relate to this. It's a bit like having to debug someone else's code. It can be more expensive than just starting from scratch.
And often, so when you're looking at contract interpretation, one of the things that you need to consider is what was the intention of the parties when they put this clause into the document. And if you've just bought that off the internet, what was your intention? You're going to say, oh, it was in there, so I thought it was right. The person on the other side of the contract might say, well, when I read that clause, I agreed to it because of this. So really stating what the intentions of the parties are, and your lawyer is in your corner advocating for what you want. So there's a lot of power in being in control of the initial drafting of documents, and having what you say as the most important things in the contract. Someone else has to try and negotiate them out later.
Yeah, fabulous. Catherine, it's been an absolute pleasure to be able to chat with you today. So much good advice. Drawing on all your experience has been absolutely fabulous. How can people get in contact with you? I'll just put up on the screen here. You've got a 1300 number. That sounds a bit scary.
that one is a little bit scary. That one goes to our admin staff so that you can be directed to the right lawyer. What we try to do is, as much as possible, have lawyers speaking to people when they call that number. So that is the main line, but we will have mobile phones that you can get in contact with us on. And the email address goes to an inbox that I monitor, so that we can make sure that that inquiry goes to the most relevant person with the right expertise within the firm.
Yeah, fabulous. And if they email that email address, they can perhaps have a 15-minute chat with you.
Absolutely. So if you email that email address and have a couple of questions, we usually the first step for us is to try and set up that phone call to work out what is it that you need from us and how can we help you, and if we can't help you, who is the right person to help you.
Yeah, fabulous. Excellent. Thanks so much, Catherine. It's been an absolute pleasure. And of course, if any founders out there are looking for better clarity on the journey to startup success, because I know this is one of the biggest challenges that you have as a new founder, or even if you've got a product in market and not seeing the traction that you'd really like, if you're looking for that clarity for exactly how to spend your time and resources to get to startup success, LeapSheep runs something called a Startup Builder Strategy Session. It's 2 hours of your time. It's $480. And if it's not the best 2 hours and $480, we'll just give you your money back. We think it's that good. There's a link to book that there on the screen. If you don't feel you're ready for that yet, just reach out using that second link and just have a chat. We're happy to jump on a call and just have a chat and see whether we're a fit for you or whether we can introduce you to someone who might be a better fit. Until next time, that's today's podcast. I want to thank you again, Catherine. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you.